Welcome to 3Ps in a Pod. This is a podcast with sincere, evidence-based information and discussions about pediatrics, parenting, and the perimenopause.
I'm Christy Herselman. I'm a writer, a speaker, a parent of 3 teenagers, and founder of The Chat.
And I'm Claudia Gray. I'm a pediatrician and an allergy specialist, and also a mother to 4 busy children, and all are in their teens.
So, Claudia, now that our children are teens, they're a little bit more robust. They don't get as sick as easily, but we all remember those early years when our kids got all sorts of sniffles and colds. And before we knew it, we had these medicine cabinets full of different medications. And today we've entitled our episode, Cold and Flu Meds, Cure or Curse. And we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of some of these medications. I'm really excited because I know all of these medicines. I know I've given them all to my children. And I'm fascinated to hear your take on some of these medications and the side effects.
Absolutely, Christy. Well, it's not just the parents wanting to medicate their children, but often doctors prescribe a host of medications very generously, without always realizing or explaining that some of these meds can do more harm than good. And children are particularly vulnerable to side effects. Their metabolic rate is different and their brains are still developing. And several ingredients in these over-the-counter cold and flu remedies have been associated with serious side effects in children, sometimes even fatal. And my mission as a pediatrician and mother is that every parent, every doctor, every pharmacist has a basic insight to let them first do no harm. And that's, of course, the Hippocratic oath that doctors need to take when they've just qualified.
Yeah, it's pretty scary stuff when you think of these side effects. And I think back, I had a couple of go-to meds. I think we all had those. And with a daughter who's prone to allergies, antihistamine was one of them, and one of those that my daughter definitely took a lot of when she was little. So do you mind just chatting us through antihistamines and some of the side effects?
Sure, absolutely. So the first thing we need to say is that antihistamines are of 2 generations. The generation that we need to be cautious about is the old generation, the old-fashioned antihistamines, which are classically sedating. Obviously, I'm not going to name brand names, but, ingredients such as chlorpheniramine, diphenhydramine, and we all know these old sedating antihistamines. They're often beautifully red-colored and flavored and taste delicious and sort of punted as a cure-all for our kids. I call these old-fashioned ones dirty drugs, and that's because they bind to many different receptors, not just histamine receptors. And these receptors are all over the body and even all over the brain, so they can cause things like dry mouth and blurred vision, and they can get into the brain, cause sedation, and if you're unlucky, there can be a paradoxical effect, and you can become hyper or hallucinating and get sleep disturbance. Disturbingly, a study has also found that taking old-fashioned antihistamines in adults and the elderly for more than 3 years in a row actually exacerbates Alzheimer's disease, which really shows us how much enters the brain. So we need to be very, very careful and actually scrap our sedating antihistamines. I did mention that the new generation antihistamines are very different. So they are precise. They allow only binding to the histamine receptor. They're generally non-sedating. They generally don't cause those side effects, and they are generally safe.
And how do I know the difference?
Short of naming some brand names, but most of the antihistamines that we get nowadays are newer generation. So the old ones with a very cheap bottle of very red stuff.
Okay.
Stay away from the red stuff.
Okay,
Stay away from the red stuff and the purple stuff, and you're fairly safe.
Okay.
If it's transparent, then it's generally a new generation in terms of syrups and suspensions.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
I definitely used a lot of those when my kids were little. And another thing that I found quite overwhelming, and I probably still do, is cough syrups.
Yeah.
There are so many of them. And the pharmacist will say, is it a wet cough? Is it a dry cough? And there's just so many options. And also knowing which ones are safe and which ones are not. Are they the same? Are some better than others?
So some are better than others, but the scary fact, Christy, is that most of them don't work very well.
Oh.
And simple home remedies, such as honey in children over the age of 1, are probably just as effective or more effective.
Wow.
The cough is, of course, a physiological response. It's a necessary response to a certain degree because we're clearing our airway of mucus or irritants or infections. So it's a good warning sign. So we don't necessarily, from the word go in a cold or flu, want to suppress that cough with a cough suppressant because we want to get rid of the mucus. Look, if it's a hacking dry cough that's been going on for 3 weeks, obviously be seen, and then the cough suppressant may play a role. Although they are a firm favorite in everyone's medicine cabinet, we do need to look carefully at our cough syrup collection. So many of them contain opioids, which are like morphines, and heroines are opioids. And cough suppressants such as codeine or dextromethorphan can actually cause respiratory depression, especially in very young kids. Moreover, they have also been abused as recreational drugs in some cases because they can actually cause euphoria. And that's why they're banned in many parts of the world as over-the-counter cough mixtures. Used long-term, something containing codeine can cause kidney failure, especially in adults. And in fact, a few years ago, the derivative of codeine called full codeine containing cough mixtures were taken off the market completely because they could cause anesthetic complications. And codeine itself is now restricted to behind the counter in South Africa. That's been since 2018. In the USA, codeine containing products are banned before the age of 18. So that tells us something. We have to keep our cough concoctions key.
Can you believe that these opioids were available off the shelf, essentially?
Absolutely.
I mean,
I
must be honest. I remember the odd teenage boy when I was young stealing their cough medicine out of their parents' cabinet and drinking it at parties, and now I know why. So one of the things I felt scariest when my kids were sick was when they were so congested they couldn't breathe. Obviously, it would interrupt their sleep. No one would sleep if your child wasn't sleeping. And so I must say those decongestants was something that I really, really used a lot of and found that gave quite a lot of relief because once the child could breathe, they could sleep, and everybody was happier. Have they got some side effects as well?
Absolutely. In fact, it depends on if it's systemic, so taken by mouth, or local. And I always say, well, local is usually lacquers because if you put something in your nose or an asthma pump or whatever, it is usually safer than the systemic form. So when we take something systemically, we take by mouth, it binds all over our bodies. So the decongestants that are often in these cold and flu syrups or medications, they contain substances like pseudoephedrine and phenylephrine, but recently they've come under a lot of scrutiny. These are stimulants, so they like our fight or flight response. They constrict blood vessels, they cause your heart rate to go up, they cause your blood pressure to go up. And that could be a problem in young kids, can be a problem in the elderly. And in fact, these systemic decongestants have been associated with an increased risk of stroke in the elderly. So wow, if the old people are getting strokes, I would really like to protect my child from that. I actually trained in the United Kingdom and learned to be quite evidence-based. And already then, how many years ago did I train as a pediatrician, Christy? But already then, these systemic decongestants were not available over the counter like they have been in South Africa.
Sure.
They were actually banned under the age of 6 years. And I like that slightly cautious approach for a medication for a simple cold or flu, because actually further studies have shown that they don't even work very well.
Oh my goodness.
In the mixtures you gave your kids, it could have been the sedating antihistamine in the same mixture that caused them to be drowsy and sleep better.
Yeah.
And another really rare complication, but that's come to the fore, is a very rare neurological condition called posterior reversible encephalopathy syndrome. So people basically go gaga when they're on these systemic decongestants. It's quite rare. It's usually reversible, not always, but they present like an encephalopathy in a guy. So ditch your oral decongestants in children. Ditch them totally. A topical like a nose spray, which decongests, is fine, but only for a few days. Okay. After a few days, your body actually habituates and becomes used to it, and you can get rebound issues.
Okay, so local is lacquer. Rather give your child something localized rather than something that targets their whole body. That makes so much sense.
Generally, Christy, that is generally the rule of thumb. Yes.
So tell us about cortisones, because this is a word we hear a lot in the treatments of all sorts of things, from skin ailments and also obviously to colds and flus. Are there side effects of cortisones that we as parents need to be aware of?
Yeah. Christy, once again, local cortisones are very different to systemic. So asthma, cortisone pumps, nasal sprays, even judicious use of cortisone on skin is fine for the prescribed period of time. But we're talking about oral or systemic cortisone. These are powerful anti-inflammatories with many, many side effects. So I'm not sure if you've ever seen someone with an immune condition, for example, who's been on long-term cortisone. They're bloated. Yes. We need to monitor their kidney function. They put on weight. They can get a fat hump, buffalo hump, high blood pressure, cataracts. So there are many side effects of systemic steroids, especially when they're taken more long-term. But even short courses can cause quite dramatic behavior changes. Children can get quite wired, anxious, or have insomnia, which obviously hinders their healing, and it can cause reduced bone density. And recent studies have shown that 4 or 5 short courses of steroids in your life lead to an increase in osteoporosis, diabetes, and cataracts, and even changes in your brain matter, your white matter integrity. So this is really scary. And this is why in some European countries, for example, you don't get outpatient sort of cortisone. You get it when you're in hospital. And really what we should be doing with systemic cortisone is to give it if children are so sick that we think, sure, they're going to be hospitalized. And so for severe asthma attacks and for croup, but not for the common cold.
Gosh, so a bit overprescribed there inside.
Absolutely overprescribed. It often in combination with the dreaded sedating antihistamines. And people think it's the cure-all for everything. Wow. And they wonder why their kids have got arm fractures after a simple rugby fall.
Speaking of overprescribing, antibiotics. Now, there's been some changes, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but tell us about antibiotics. What are the trends? What are the side effects? What are some of the things we need to look out for? And what shifts have you seen?
I'm not sure I've seen total shifts as a doctor, because patients are always, we're mostly still hungry for antibiotics. Okay. The coughs are prolonged, or the mucus turns yellow. When often that is just the normal part of a viral cycle. But of course, antibiotics can be life-saving under certain circumstances. And they were only introduced in the 1940s, less than a century ago. Wow. But taking an antibiotic treats a bacterial infection, and the majority of our sort of milder respiratory infections are viral, so they don't work for a virus. And they can cause side effects like diarrhea, rashes, allergic reactions, a disturbance in your microbiome. So all the bugs in your gut get disturbed when you take a course, especially of non-specific antibiotics that don't just target one specific bug. And it can take 6 months, Christy, to reestablish a healthy microbiome after a course of antibiotics.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's what we call the dysbiosis.
Okay. And so what I've seen, interestingly, is I found when my kids were little that doctors would prescribe a lot of antibiotics quite quickly. It would be almost the norm, but what I'm seeing a lot more of now is doctors asking us as parents to just wait it out. maybe giving a script and saying, look, if they're not better by day 6, day 7, try something. And I find that encouraging because that lines up with what you're saying, that what it really does is puts a little Band-Aid over the parents' panic.
Yeah, to a certain degree, sometimes they are necessary.
Yeah, but it's quite encouraging that we're not seeing them as much, and the wait and see approach is a bit more common, more from what I've seen.
Yeah.
And also, even with the word on the streets amongst moms, is this idea of understanding what you've already said to me, is that it won't work on a virus. So it's a waste of money. It's not good for your child. So that's really interesting. It's a little, just now you said something about honey and the natural cures, and so some of those are better. Now, my husband's family are very into herbal based medications. We're quite a mainstream family. My mom's a nurse, so we've always kind of gone mainstream medication that's tested and approved. But what about natural medications?
Very, very good point. If you don't mind, a little diversion to our previous section talking about proven and studied. Just to finish off on the antibiotics, one of the reasons why people are more cautious on it is because of the notion of antibiotic resistance.
Okay.
And this means that the bugs that we have are no longer responding and killed by the antibiotics because they've kind of got so used to them, they've seen it so often. He's my friend now, he doesn't kill me anymore. And that notion is called antibiotic resistance. And that's why doctors are being a lot more careful. South African doctors have taken a bit of a longer time to embrace this, but I think they are getting better at it because the reality is we're going to run out of options with antibiotics if we create this large population scale resistance, which means that the two of us in 2050, when we are elderly, might die of pneumonia because there are no antibiotics left.
Wow.
That's a reality. And the thought is that 20 million people annually will die of infections after 2050 because of antibiotic resistance. And this is why we should be also taking care not to overprescribe. Christy, you moved on, we hear about things like natural antibiotics and herbs, and a lot of people think, well, surely that's the way to go. Surely that's the safest way. But many of these formulations are marketed rampantly on social media, even fly-by-nights. This is going to make you better quickly. It's natural, it's herbal, and people think if something's natural, surely it must be safe. But not all herbs are heroes.
Yeah.
So there can also be side effects. And remember, herbal substances, natural substances, are not tested formally by our medicines control agencies. So they're not as tightly regulated. So we may not even know what we're taking. And recently, some herbs like excessive doses of turmeric have been associated with liver toxicity, as has sort of excessive doses of red yeast, rice, and even green tea in the normal form that we eat or drink.
Yeah.
Lovely normal green tea or a little half a teaspoon of turmeric on your meal, that's fine.
Okay.
But an overdose, these herbal substances can actually be dangerous.
Okay. So like you've actually always said, is it's about dosage.
Yeah.
And it's about making sure you know how much is a healthy amount.
Absolutely.
Oh, wow. Okay. So not all herbs are heroes.
Not all herbs are heroes.
And of course, if we take these medications responsibly in the correct dose, they're incredibly helpful for us and safe and beneficial. And so it's a case of not over medicating. It's a case of wait and see and, just being wise and not over medicating our children, especially with these colds that are, as you said, majority viral. So thank you for that. And do you have a parenting pearl for us today?
I do. Sometimes we need medications. And of course, as a traditionally trained medical doctor, I write scripts every single day. But it shouldn't be seen as a warrior badge or a naughty badge if you walk out of the doctor's office with a list of prescriptions of 6-7 medications for your child. Think hard about that, because often it's just throwing things, whatever you can find to relieve symptoms, but with possible side effects. So often with common colds, less is more.
Okay.
And within that less medicating, we can increase our hugs and cuddles and topical decongestants and a little bit of paracetamol or ibuprofen to make them feel better, and use that miraculous thing, that 4-letter word, time, will heal a lot of these things. And medications might not even shorten that time. So just be aware that local is lacquer and less is more for common colds.
Okay. Thank you so much for that, Claudia. I feel so much more equipped, and I am definitely going to be waiting it out and giving that advice to my friends with younger kids. And thank you so much for joining us for this episode. I hope it was helpful and empowered you as a parent.
Remember that this is for educational purposes and does not replace a good healthcare consultation. We can't wait to see you in 2 weeks' time. Thank you for listening to 3 Ps in a Pod.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.